go ahead and get started. I'm Mackenzie right now. I'm a SEBL Specialist in regions 1 and 2. So that is MSUs 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, along with LPS and OPS. And my background is in school psychology.
And I'm Jill Gunther, another one of the social emotional behavioral learning specialists. My background is speech language pathology and then special education leadership. And I serve regions 3 and 4, which is ESUs 1, 7, 8, and then 9, 10, 11, and 17.
Good morning, Emily Arkfeld, the third SEBL specialist. I was previously a school social worker and currently serve Region 5, ESUs 13, 15, and 16.
And I did drop in a link for the PDF slide deck. If you guys wanted to follow along, I'll drop that in again.
So if you all could put your name and position in the chat along with your word for this school year. If you haven't decided on a word this year, you can just look at the image on the left and type whatever speaks to you this morning. Well, we are excited to kick off the school year with you. Thank you all again for coming. Like we did last time, we have a Padlet with a bunch of resources. It is a new Padlet link from last semester, but it will be the same link this entire year. And so for each Coffee Connect, we'll put in some new resources, and then afterwards we'll create a new column where we add those resources and the recording and the slides to a separate Padlet link within this. That way it's kind of a one-stop shop for all of the resources through the Outreach Coffee Connects. And then there is password, capital NeMTSS, all capitals. It does matter, you won't be able to get in if you don't type it in correctly. So we'll start off with an overview of social emotional behavior learning. As you can see on the slide, we define it as the systematic process of fostering social and emotional skills among students and adults in order to create safe and supportive environments with positive behavioral outcomes for all. So when we think of SEBL skills, you can kind of think of, there's a lot of terms. You could do life skills or character traits or social skills. It's really those things that we need to navigate our everyday life. And it's the skills that we want to teach our students to be able to be successful, but also as adults. When we think of social emotional skills and growth, it's really a journey that we're on throughout our entire life and not a destination that we come to. And so as we grow and learn and have experiences, those skills will strengthen and will ebb and flow throughout our lives. And SEBL skills are teachable. I like to think of them as muscles because the more we focus on them and work on them, the stronger they will get. And as we are able to grow and strengthen those skills, we're able to then show that kind of shows up in the way that we behave. So when we started with Nebraska NeMTSS, we included the B in the SEL. A lot of people call it SEL and then they talk about behavior, but we know that they're very interconnected because if our students don't have those social skills and they're not taught those skills, they're going to have a hard time meeting those behavioral expectations. And so whether you have a PBIS system or if you use a different system, all schools have expectations for behavior. And so if we're able to really intricately teach and weave that in with those social skills, we'll really see the most bang for our buck. And on the right side of the screen, you'll see we included like a PBIS behavior acronym. This school has SOAR, but we also included that career readiness image because we know that those social skills are things that, yes, our littles and our elementary kids need to know and need to practice, but also we want to teach that in the higher levels too, because our employers, after the students leave the public school system, really need those skills to have successful employees. And when we work in schools, a lot of times we see there's a lot of different teaming structures. So we might see a school climate team and an academic team and a mental health team and an SEL team. But a lot of times these conversations they're having are very similar. And so moving forward, when we're having these conversations, trying to work interdependently among the teams. You might sit on multiple of these teams. So figuring out where are the conversations very similar and how could we combine the teams together so we're working interdependently and we're using multiple sources of data as we're making those decisions. You're probably already aware that you signed up today to talk about integrating SEBL into Tier 1 instruction. We have made this competency web. The competencies are more like constructs, so like self-awareness, self-management. You kind of know what it means, but we try to drill down a little bit further with the specific skills. This image is not an end-all be-all. There's a lot of different skills that go into each competency. We just made this kind of as a quick reference to dig a little deeper. But when we think about integrating SEL into our academic instruction, we think about the content. So what happens through what the students learn, which would be the curriculum or the content you're teaching, and then how they learn it, which is the process. And so while you might have an SEL curriculum that you're doing you're doing intentional teaching around SEL skills, we really want to focus in on the process because we teach academics all day, but you can really embed some of that SEBL language within your conversation and within your lesson plans. So you can target some of those SEBL skills throughout the day, throughout different academic subjects. A lot of people are already doing this. They might a lot of the SEL work is implicit. So you're kind of doing it, but you're not really naming it, or you might not know you're doing it. So the work that we really want to focus on today is doing it on purpose, teaching those SEBL skills and using some of that language explicitly, because when we call out to students those skills, we're really helping them identify the skill and then build that muscle so they can do it themselves as they learn and grow. And so today we're going to focus in on Tier 1. A lot of times when we think about NeMTSS, we think about that triangle, that Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. But we want to bring it back and just do a little call out to the essential components of NeMTSS, because we know that we need that strong foundation to build that triangle. And so we want to make sure we have shared leadership, specifically around SEBL. We want our administrators and our teachers to know what it is and have their voices heard as we do this work. Doing some trainings and building up the capacity and the knowledge of those working. How are we communicating what we're doing and collaborating with those in our school and even our community partners and families? And how are we using evidence-based practices throughout this process? And then what data are we collecting and how are we using that information to make decisions? So just a reminder that we have to lay that strong foundation as we are also integrating in that continuum support of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So Jill's going to take it off and talk about integrating into our core instruction.
Perfect. Thanks, Mackenzie. So yes, so speaking of that strong foundation, so that Tier 1 core instruction is really for all students. It's that preventative and proactive piece, and really building those skills around social, emotional, behavioral, and academic. It's creating those positive relationships with both students and staff. using those evidence-based strategies, those high quality instructional materials, having those fidelity checks for implementation, and then balancing those needs with the resources that are available. So that tier 1 core instruction is really where the magic happens, right? It's provided to all students, with approximately right around 75 to 85% of those students reaching benchmark, which would be that criteria established by those screening tools. If below that 75% of students are reaching that benchmark criteria, that's where we really need to have those conversations around intensifying that focus of improving that tier 1 core instruction. And that's where we may need to move to layering on those additional supports. So perhaps just kind of moving into those that additional instruction. And when we're thinking about that tier 2 and tier 3, it's really important to remember that that core instruction is that tier 1. And as we're layering on those supports, it's not instead of that core instruction, it's in addition to. And so that's kind of that just piece to remember. I'm sure you guys have probably heard kind of that saying that goes along, systems can't intervene their way out of ineffective core instruction. So just like Mackenzie had mentioned, really building up and beefing up that tier 1, that foundation of the skills that we're providing students. What we do to support students. So here are just some different examples of some of the things that we're doing to really help build those systems, especially when we're thinking about that tier 1 core instruction. So I mentioned building those relationships, not just with students, but amongst colleagues, amongst families, community partners, community members, all stakeholders involved, really. Communicating those predictable routines and expectations, perhaps even looking at creating some homerooms or advisory groups, maybe looking at how we're building those connections and helping students feel connected to their building. And perhaps that could be through some different extracurriculars, through some different clubs or activities, integrating that SEBL instruction. And we'll kind of take a look at some of the different standards for Nebraska and how some of those SEBL skills are really already embedded within. And it's really about continuing to be intentional with building those skills. Practicing culturally responsive teaching, providing that differentiation of learning, and then those safe and predictable environments, and that modeling. Modeling is that huge piece, being able to model those skills for our students and really showing them how we're practicing those social, emotional, behavioral learning skills so that in turn they can just really learn from and build on their own skills. Here are just some different examples of how we build those systems to support students. So we have some different pictures kind of to represent some of those pieces. So we have the PBIS, the Nebraska PBIS. We have that classroom Y. So especially when we're looking at like mental health promotion, that is a great resource. If we're looking for ways to build that into our system, that is a great resource there. Universal screening, restorative practices, trauma-informed practices, our problem-solving model, and really looking at database decision-making. Any PD around any of those pieces, so really helping to support our staff in continuing to build those practices, and then family engagement and school safety. Thinking about some of those pieces and school climate and building that positive school climate. So we have here just a visual that really kind of breaks down the pieces that build a positive school climate. So we have engagement, safety, and environment. So within engagement comes those relationships. So building those connections, helping students to be connected to their building through different participation in activities or clubs, and respect for diversity. And then within safety, we have emotional safety, physical safety, and then substance use. So really kind of just education around that. And then environment. So physical environment, the academic environment, and how we're building those positive environments, and then wellness, and then disciplinary environment. So really thinking about that school climate and how that builds on that positive student well-being, how that builds on academic success, And research has shown that positive school climate has a direct correlation with increased attendance and achievement and retention, and then graduation rates as well. This is just a nice little quote that we wanted to add in there because it really goes along with that engagement piece and building those connections and building those relationships. So remember, the more you connect, the less you correct. Your success as an educator is more dependent on those positive, caring, trustworthy relationships than any skill, idea, tip, or tool. These are some different examples of some things that you may already be doing within your classroom, within your building, to really build those safe and supportive environments. So these are examples of some physical and academic environments. So that first one there, you can see a lot of different just flexible seating options. That is one way. I think it's kind of hard to see, but there on the windows, there's some pictures of student faces. So it really gives them that representation within their classroom, makes them really feel a part of their classroom. They get to see their work displayed in their classroom as well to really kind of make it their own, right? Some of the other pictures just showing that the colors, the organization, and how things are kind of laid out. There's a little picture of like a calm down corner with some different tools and some things that students can use. And then that top picture is of some like bathroom stalls that are decorated with different just positive messages. So all different ways to really build that positive physical and academic environment within the building. Another way, so some student check-ins. So examples of things, again, that you may already be doing, but thinking about on that last slide, those physical and academic environments and building those positive ways. These are just things that we can do within our classroom, again, to build and help students feel safe and supported and welcomed. So we have some different examples of student check-ins here. And so 3 links, so morning messages, check-in questions that are from Panorama. So that is a great resource. And then sample prompting circle questions. And these are all linked within our Padlet as well, but just things to kind of check out as maybe you're building, maybe through morning meetings or closing circles, just wanting to do some check-ins, maybe either before or after a lesson to see how students are feeling about the content that was taught. So maybe just during some social emotional wellness checks, maybe during just some different breaks, or if you're introducing some just more challenging content, especially maybe in place of taking attendance. That was a way that I really incorporated them in my classroom as well. So we kind of had like a little check-in and a question of the day that we started with each day, or maybe during like an advisory period or during a homeroom, or maybe it's a core group or a smaller group of students to really work to build those connections and those relationships, not only with the staff, with the students, but also amongst the students as well. Continuing on that same idea of building those safe and supportive environments, these are just some examples of different ways that we can really explicitly address or call attention to those social, emotional, behavioral learning skills that are embedded within the curriculum, within the instruction. So even though Nebraska doesn't have SEBL standards, we wanted to just give you guys some different examples of some different standards. So we have ELA, we have social studies, and we have PE, and how those social, emotional, behavioral learning skills really are actually embedded. And it's about us really being intentional with those skills, calling them what they are, and being able to kind of pick those things out. So that first example is an English language arts one from 10th grade. And if you'll take a look, we can kind of pull out that the drawing conclusions, that deepening the understanding of self and others really is a great example of self-awareness. So one of our competencies. That second standard there within ELA, so being able to analyze for cultural significance and within those topics. So a great example of social awareness really falls within there. taking a look at that social studies, which is one from grade 7, being able to understand just different perspectives. So perspective taking kind of along those same lines of empathy. Again, social awareness is what we're seeing there. So if you think back to our competency web that Mackenzie had reintroduced, those are some of the skills within. And then PE, which is from kindergarten. So that personal responsibility, responsible social behavior, and then proper etiquette and safety. That actually really involves 3 of the different competencies. So responsible decision-making for that first one, relationship skills for being able to work with others, and then self-management, being able to demonstrate proper etiquette and safety falls within that self-management competency. So we really wanted to just show how you guys are already doing these things. You're already doing great things within your classroom. But like Mackenzie had mentioned, it's really about being intentional and calling those skills what they are and being able to identify those skills and looking at what we may need to continue to build on. On the other side of this slide, again, we have some great resources for you guys. That first one is a teacher self-assessment for SEL in the classroom. So it takes a look at some different SEBL skills and really can provide some great information on maybe some strengths within your own classroom, but then maybe some areas to continue to build on as well. That second one really kind of does a similar layout of our social emotional behavioral learning competency web, where it has the competencies and then some of the skills that fall within each of those competencies. And then also some just example lesson plans. So we have some ELA, some math, and then some social studies, and then across different grade levels as well. So again, just things to kind of take a look at, maybe to build on, to get some ideas from, but some good resources. So here, just really thinking about kind of a comparison that we might say is SEL is kind of like math. It really changes based on those skill levels, kind of morphs into some higher level skills. We need those basic skills before we can move into those higher level skills. So we need those number sense and number skills before we can move into being able to learn algebra or to learn geometry or some of those higher level things. And social emotional behavioral learning is really very similar to that. We need some of those basic skills, and then we continue to scaffold and build upon those. And so thinking about just some giving you guys some examples of kind of that development progression, we have a nice little visual that just kind of moves from kindergarten to 5th grade to 12th grade with some examples of those SEBL skills. So in kindergarten, really working on being able to identify those feelings and those emotions. So that self-awareness and those self-management, but we continue to build on those skills. So looking at maybe grade 5, being able to really manage those emotions. So having that self-awareness and that basic awareness kind of those feelings and emotions, but then building on that and being able to manage those emotions. And then continuing to build as an example of grade 12. So being able to really understand how our behaviors and how those things have an impact on others, on our friends, on our community, on our just classroom as a whole. So you just kind of see that progression as well there. And here is just a nice visual of some different just social emotional behavioral learning skills that employers are really looking for. So Mackenzie mentioned earlier, when we're thinking about those competency skills, it's not only needed for those positive behavior expectations, but just especially for our middle school and our high school students and post-secondary, it's what employers are looking for as well. So this visual here just does a really nice job of taking each of the competencies and then identifying some of the skills that fall within those competencies. So things that we want to target, those things that we are really working to build for our students each and every day. But this just does a nice job of kind of laying them out and maybe even a nice visual to share with the students as well so they can see those things.
Thanks, Jill. So we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to break this down by competency and what this might sound like in your class, in the classrooms. And if you've been with us a while, you've probably seen our slide that has, it has the plate and it says SEL is not one more thing on the plate, it is the plate. And so just a reminder that while things like having a social emotional learning curriculum are fantastic, and we definitely encourage that, and counselors doing push-in lessons and things over skills and competencies, it doesn't all have to be that big. We do want those things in place, but it's all of the things that the teachers and other educators and staff are doing every day to help build and grow those competencies. And so when we talk about self-awareness, yes, we talk about like labeling emotions and labeling feelings, and we want all of those things and having mood meters, and those are all great, but also it can be something like you just taught a math lesson. And so you say, we learned a lot about fractions today, let's do a fist to 5 so that you and I can both be aware of how you're feeling about the new information. And so this teaches kids to reflect on those feelings. Yes, they're identifying feelings, but gosh, that lesson was really hard for me and I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling frustrated. Or I'm super excited about this and I get it and I'm like ready to hit the ground running and I can help all of my friends because I totally understand. So they get to reflect on that and feel how they're feeling and recognize that. And then you as a teacher or the educator gets to recognize how your students are feeling about that. And then you know how to adjust your teaching and where you need extra support. So a quick 10-second, 20-second sentence, and it's building both of those skills for your students and for yourself and for educators. Okay. When we look at self-management, again, we think about so I recognize my feelings and emotions and how am I managing these? What am I doing to, help bring myself back down to being regulated? But it's also about setting goals. And so something like when you're giving instruction about a project or homework completion, saying when you set a goal, you use your self-management skills to stay organized and keep track of when your assignments are due. So they're learning how to prioritize things, how to self-motivate themselves. And when students learn that, we're giving them that agency over their learning. And we know that when they feel like they have that agency, that their learning really takes off and they have a buy-in to it and they feel value in that. Okay. For responsible decision-making, something like you just, read To Kill a Mockingbird. And so you're going to make some judgments and discuss that with an open mind, and that these skills will help us use our responsible decision-making. When we think about, well, this isn't even just a little kid example, but for all students, and we give them voice and choice and their expectations and the rules in their classroom and in their buildings, then they are making those responsible decisions and they have buy-in to that. And they understand how those rules and expectations are connected to responsible decision-making and have accountability. And when they come up with, what steps do we take when someone is not following those expectations? It really helps them, grow that muscle, like Mackenzie was saying about how do I do this in real life? For social awareness, talking about a story problem. So someone might have seen this differently than you did. Think about how and why that is, and then giving them that language. When we talk about different strategies and perspectives, we're working on social awareness. If they're doing a math problem and somebody came to an answer in a different way, it's not that the answer is wrong, but somebody had a different perspective of how they got there. So using those, and then you can use like feelings charts. So if you're reading a story or watching a clip or something, and students can look at their feeling chart and try to identify how the character might be feeling in that moment, and then have some discussion that some people might see that differently. Their emotions might show up differently for them, and so they're seeing them differently than somebody else in the classroom. Perspective. So with perspective taking, like optical illusions is something that works in here too, that people see things differently. It was like that red or green dress or shoe or whatever it was, and it caused that whole blow up on social media. And so we've linked some new resources around this in the Padlet as well. When you're thinking about relationship skills and doing a science lab, you might say, when we were working in these lab groups, everyone has an assigned role. And then this helps us develop communication, collaboration, and relationship skills. And back to that accountability, all of these skills and competencies are intertwined. And when you are growing one here, then it plays into your growth in another place. So we didn't give a lot of activity resources with this one because they are all linked in that Padlet from all of our Coffee Connects from last spring. So everything we've done, every competency that has the video in there, and then the link to the Padlet with all the activities and resources for that. But really just showing that how we talk about these skills can be done across content areas. It's not just that counselor coming in and doing a lesson on friendship and relationship skills, but then the teacher is continuing to say that language and give the students a language and show them like, how are we practicing this in what they're doing every day, all day. So it shouldn't be overwhelming and stressful to think about doing this in your classroom, because again, like Jill and Mackenzie have been saying the whole time, you guys, everyone is already doing this. This is just good teaching practice. And most of our teachers are phenomenal. It's just giving that extra bit of language to tying it to those skills and those competencies and helping the students recognize what they're doing and when they're doing it. And then that helps them be able to take it out into other areas. So not just in the classroom, but in their community, if they're a part of clubs and organizations, back to their families. And that's how, we just continue to grow these skills at a community level as well.